"That pie ain't fit for Hogs, girl," someone snickered, right before the whole bunkhouse went silent. Mara Hale froze, with the dish still warm in her hands, breath caught like a rope pulled tight. The Christmas spices she'd loved since childhood drifted into the air, mixing with laughter that felt sharper than barbed wire. And though she stood firm, her heart sagged the way it always did whenever someone reminded her she took up too much space. Tate Carver swaggered forward, boots thudding like a dare. "What's this supposed to be, Mara? Dessert or a disaster?" A few ranch hands chuckled, and even those who didn't laugh looked away to save themselves. Folks had a habit of pretending cruelty wasn't happening if it didn't touch them. Mara swallowed hard. Like many of us, she'd learned to swallow pain quietly, to fold it into the corners of her heart the way she folded butter into dough, fast, tight, unseen. "It's just a Christmas pie," she whispered, but the softness of her voice only made them bolder. Tate poked a finger into the crust. "Looks like it came out of your backside more than the oven." The room erupted. Mara felt her cheeks burn hot, the same shame she'd carried since girlhood, rising like smoke she couldn't breathe through. "Don't," she murmured, hugging the dish closer. It wasn't just a pie. It was the one thing she'd hoped would bring a little sweetness into a place that often felt as cold as the Wyoming wind outside. It was the first recipe her mama ever taught her. It was the one thing she still believed she was good at. But Tate grabbed it anyway, snatched it from her hands and held it up like a trophy. "Let's see what we got here." "Please." Mara reached for it, but he swung it away, and for one suspended second, the room tilted. Then the pie crashed to the floor. The crust shattered. Filling splattered across the wood planks. Someone shouted, "Aw, hell," and another laughed so hard he slapped his knee. Mara felt something inside her crack with it. Silence fell, not gentle but heavy, because Clay Maddox had stood up from the corner table. The rancher's presence always carried weight. Clay didn't talk much, didn't smile much, didn't raise hell unless forced to. He just watched the world with those storm gray eyes, like he was measuring which pieces were worth picking up and which were better left broken. He stared at the ruined pie. Didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stared. Unreadable, unshaken. Mara wiped her face quickly, ashamed of her tears. She hated crying in front of men like Tate. They fed on it. "Aw, come on, boss," Tate laughed nervously. "You weren't actually going to eat that, were you?" Clay lifted his gaze to him, slowly, deliberately. The kind of look that stripped a man down without raising a hand. Tate's grin faltered. Mara tried to shrink back, tried to melt into the wall like she'd done her whole life. But Clay's eyes shifted to her, and something in them softened. Not pity, recognition, maybe even respect. "Clay," she tried to speak, but her voice cracked. He didn't answer her. Instead, he stepped forward once, then again. His boots crushed a few crumbs, but he didn't look down. Everyone waited. The bunkhouse felt suddenly too small, too warm, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes a heart race. Clay stopped beside the destroyed pie. For a breathless moment, Mara thought he might scold them, might defend her, might tell them what their cruelty cost. Instead, he said the strangest thing. "Bring me a plate." And the whole room froze, just as the story was about to turn. Nobody moved, not even Tate, when Clay repeated, calm as a winter creek, "Plate." His voice wasn't loud, but something in it made every ranch hand scramble. One of the younger boys fetched a dented tin plate and handed it over like it was a church offering. Clay crouched beside the ruined pie. Mara watched him with her breath caught in her throat. her fingers trembling the way they always did when she felt eyes on her. Anyone who's ever been mocked for or offering their best would recognize that tremble, raw, involuntary, born from too many wounds. Clay didn't hesitate. He scooped a chunk of the broken crust and, filling onto the plate with his bare hand. Someone muttered, "Boss, come on." But Clay didn't look up. He lifted the bite to his mouth, slow and deliberate. The bunkhouse held its breath. Then he ate it, every crumb, every smear of cinnamon and apple and hope she'd poured into that dish. His jaw worked steadily, eyes half closed like he was memorizing the taste. Mara felt exposed in a way she couldn't explain, like her heart was on that plate instead of a pie. Tate forced a laugh. "You making a point or just desperate for dessert?" Clay ignored him. He crouched again, gathering more of the ruined pie, tapping stray crumbs into the plate. He ate another bite, and another. He didn't rush, didn't shame her by pretending it was perfect. He just honored it, honored her effort, as if food made with care was sacred. Mara's vision blurred. She couldn't tell if it was gratitude or humiliation or both tangled together, so tight they choked her. Clay swallowed, cleared his throat, and stood. "Reckon you boys owe her an apology." The room stiffened. The micro-hook landed like a spur striking the floor. Clay wiped his mouth with his sleeve, gaze shifting across the faces of the ranch hands. Some looked ashamed. Some stared at their boots. But Tate? Tate bristled. "Apology?" he scoffed. "For what? Being honest?" Clay didn't answer right away. He simply studied Tate with that slow, assessing stare. "For disrespecting the woman who feeds you, for wasting food, for being a damn fool." Embarrassed snickers rose from the crowd. Tate's face flushed red. Mara felt panic rising. She didn't want this to turn into a fight. She didn't want to be the reason anyone threw a punch. Her heart pounded like hooves on hard ground. Clay sensed her unease. His voice softened. "Ain't about fighting, Mara." But Tate wasn't done. "Look, boss, if you want to eat garbage off the floor, that's your business. But this girl," he jabbed a finger toward her, "wants special treatment because she baked something? Hell, half the time she looks like she's already eaten the whole spread." A few ranch hands gasped under their breath. The cruelty struck her like a whip. Mara fought to hold herself still, but her shoulders curled inward. Instinctive protection learned over years of ridicule. Clay stepped in front of her, not touching her, just placing himself between her and the cruelty. "Watch your mouth." "What?" Tate barked. "Truth hurts?" He shifted his stance, chest puffed. "If she thinks she's got talent, let her prove it. Let's see if she can bake something worth eating by Christmas Eve." Clay's jaw tightened. "You don't get to..." But Mara lifted a shaky hand. I'll do it." The entire room turned to her. Tate smirked. "So it's a challenge, then." Mara swallowed, fear and determination burning together. Clay faced her, worry flickering in his eyes, but she nodded ever so slightly. Tate grinned, sensing advantage. "Good, because if you fail, girl, you're quitting this kitchen." One ranch hand stepped forward, arms crossed. "I ain't apologizing, Mara. In fact, I got my own challenge for you." The bunkhouse door creaked as the last of the sunlight bled across the floor. Thin, orange, and cold. Tate stepped into it like he was stepping onto a stage. Arms folded, mouth twisted in that cruel half-smile folks wore when they thought they'd already won. "All right, then," he announced, voice echoing off the rafters. "If Mara Hale thinks she's got more to offer than a busted-up hog pie, let's put it to the test." Laughter rippled through the room, sharp and eager. Folks loved a show, especially when they weren't the ones on the chopping block. Mara stood frozen, fingers gripping the edge of a work table as if the wood were the only thing keeping her upright. Humiliation coiled in her chest like a snake. Anyone who's ever been mocked for simply trying would have recognized that sinking, breathless ache. She'd lived with it for years. Clay stepped forward. "Tate, that's enough." But Tate talked right over him. "Christmas Eve. She brings a new pie to the bunkhouse. A good one. One that ain't falling apart or smelling like burnt sugar and pity." A few men snorted. One elbowed another, whispering something that made their shoulders shake. "And if she fails," Tate continued, grinning wider, "she quits the kitchen for good. We deserve better than slop." Clay's eyes darkened. "You don't get to decide that." "Oh, but I do," Tate shot back, swaggering closer. "See, boss, this ain't just about a pie. It's about standards, pride. You're letting her get soft. And soft don't survive out here." He leaned in, dropping his voice low but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Everyone knows she ain't got the spine." Mara flinched. She felt their eyes crawling over her, judging her, weighing her, dismissing her. The humiliation wasn't new, but something different stirred beneath it this time. A spark, faint but real. Maybe it was Clay eating that ruined pie like it mattered. Maybe it was the way he'd stood between her and their cruelty. Or maybe, after years of shrinking, she was finally tired of being small. Clay touched her shoulder gently. "Mara, you don't owe them a damn thing." But she straightened anyway. Her voice shook, but it carried. "I'll do it." The room went silent, shocked that she dared speak up at all. Tate blinked, taken aback for half a breath before the smirk returned. "Good. Then it's settled." He tipped his hat mockingly. "May the best baker win." Someone laughed. Someone else whistled. The tension in the air cracked like a whip. Mara felt it all pressing in around her. Expectation, mockery, doubt. But underneath it, a thin line of determination wound itself around her ribs. Clay stepped forward again. "Mara," she shook her head. "Clay, please." She didn't want protection, not if it came at the cost of her pride. That small gesture, her refusal to hide behind him, shut the room up more effectively than any threat could have. Clay blinked slowly, realizing something had shifted inside her. Tate clapped his hands once. "Then it's official. Sundown on Christmas Eve, we see what the girl's really made of." He leaned closer to Mara as he passed, his breath hot and sour. "And when you lose, don't expect anyone to miss you." Mara inhaled sharply, but didn't look away. Another small victory. The mocking voices rose again, laughter bouncing off the walls. But she didn't stay to hear the rest. She turned, shoulders tight, but a head held just an inch higher than before, and walked out into the cold evening air. The door swung behind her. And just as the darkness swallowed her steps, she heard boots following. Clay Maddox stepping out after her into the falling dusk. The cold hit her first, sharp, stinging, merciless. Mara stumbled behind the wood shed, boots crunching over frozen ground, breath tearing out in white puffs. She pressed her palms to her face, willing the humiliation to fade, but the tears came anyway, hot against the winter air, the kind of tears a person hides their whole life until they finally crack. She sank onto an overturned bucket, shoulders shaking. For once, the emptiness of the ranch felt like mercy. No eyes, no laughter, no Tate, just the wind brushing past the eaves, whispering things only the hurt can hear. But the snow heard something else, too. Footsteps. Slow, measured, familiar. "Mara!" Clay's voice came from the shadows. She stiffened. "Please, don't." Her voice broke. I don't need anyone seeing me like this. Clay stepped around the shed, the fading sun catching the edge of his jaw, the silver in his stubble. He didn't crowd her, didn't sit too close, just lowered himself onto an old wooden crate opposite her, leaving space for dignity to breathe. That why you ran out here? He asked quietly. To fall apart alone? She hugged her coat tighter. Better than falling apart in front of them. Clay nodded slowly, eyes tracing the snowflakes beginning to drift lazily from the sky. You know, folks ain't the only ones who've been laughed at. He let that settle in the air before adding, a long time ago, someone broke me too. Mara looked up despite herself. Clay never talked about his past. Ranchers like him carried their stories like scars, visible only in glimpses. He took a breath. When I was 16, I tried to bake my ma a birthday cake. Thing came out looking like a saddlebag hit by a stampede. My brothers tore into me for weeks. A faint, rueful smile touched his lips. Didn't cook again till I was grown. Shame's a powerful thing. The wind shifted, swirling loose snow between them like a curtain. Mara wiped her cheek. You? Humiliated? It sounded impossible coming from a man as steady as stone. Humiliation don't care how tough you look, Clay said. Cuts the same way for all of us. He met her eyes softening. And you ain't alone unless you choose to be. Mara swallowed hard. His words touched something deep inside. The part that it had always believed loneliness was safer than hope. Clay leaned forward slightly. Let me help you practice. We got time for Christmas Eve. I know my way around a kitchen more than folks think. She shook her head quickly. Clay, if anyone sees you helping me, they'll say I needed a man to save me. They'll laugh harder. I don't give a damn what they say. I do, she whispered. You saw what happened today. If I give them more reason, I'll never hear the end of it. Clay exhaled slowly, watching her, like a man trying to understand a map drawn in tears instead of ink. Mara, pride's good, but pride that keeps you from growing? That's just fear in a nicer jacket. She blinked at him. No one had ever put her pain into words so plain. Still, she shook her head. Thank you, but no, this has to be mine to fix. Clay rose to his feet, dusting snow from his coat. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He respected her boundary the way he respected the land, quietly, fully. All right, he said softly. But if you change your mind, I'm here. Mara stood too, brushing snow from her skirt. The sky darkened as clouds thickened overhead, heavy, bruise-colored, rolling low. Clay glanced upward. Storm's coming fast. A sharp wind slammed against the shed, rattling loose boards. Then the first howl of the blizzard swept across the ranch. And as the temperature plunged, Mara realized the storm would trap every soul on that land, locking her and Clay in a closeness neither of them had chosen, but the winter had forced. By morning, the ranch was buried under a white, snarling storm. Snow piled against doors. Windows rattled under wind that sounded like distant wolves. Nobody was going anywhere, which meant one thing. Mara had to cook for all of them. She stood in the kitchen doorway, breath fogging the cold air, staring at 5 sacks of flour, 3 crates of potatoes, and the iron stove that groaned like an old mule whenever it heated. Her stomach twisted. Holiday cooking always did this. Always dragged up memories of the Christmas when her cousins mocked her for burning a tray of rolls, or the year her aunt whispered that Mara ate more than she contributed. Ghosts had long memories. Mara tied on her apron, hands trembling. Just breathe, she whispered, but her voice sounded small against the storm. Clay entered quietly. brushing snow from his shoulders. He wore no hat, no gloves, just the kind of stubborn warmth that came from a man who didn't let winter tell him where to stand. He didn't speak at first, just reached for a lantern and set it beside her. "You don't have to do this alone," he murmured. She stiffened. "I told you, I can handle it." "You can," he agreed, "but that don't mean you should." He stepped back, giving her space, not touching bowls, not correcting her, just being there, silent, steady, a wall against the storm in more ways than one. As Mara chopped apples, old fear crept into her ribs, fear of messing up, of confirming every cruel thing anyone had ever said about her. Anyone who's ever carried a holiday wounds would understand the way her throat tightened with each uneven slice. Outside the kitchen, voices rose and fell. The men were restless, hungry, and trapped. Pressure built like steam under a lid. Mara's hands began to shake. Clay noticed. "Remember what I said," he murmured. "You ain't alone unless you choose to be." For a moment, his words warmed her, more than the stove. But then the doorway darkened. "Tate!" He stomped in, tracking snow across the floor, eyes scanning the counter like he was looking for something to criticize. Mara's pulse spiked. He smirked. "Cold in here? Or is that just you trembling?" Mara turned away, pretending to focus on the mixing bowl. Tate leaned closer, voice oily. "Don't mess up again." Her fingers slipped. The bowl clattered out of her hands and shattered onto the floor. Clay moved before the echo faded. "Enough." Tate shrugged. "Just motivating her." Clay stepped between them, not touching but blocking, his presence thick as the storm outside. Mara crouched to clean the mess, cheeks burning, heart thudding with old shame. She hated how she reacted around Tate, how every memory of being mocked at holidays past rose like a tide she couldn't fight. Her breath shook. She couldn't let them see her break. Not again. As she dumped the broken pieces into the trash, a raw thought pulsed through her. If you felt her pain, ride with us in true Western stories, where every tale finds its voice, even the ones cracked by old winters. The mid-story CTA settled inside the moment, like a whisper meant for wounded hearts. Mara straightened, forcing herself back into the rhythm of chopping, mixing, stirring, but Tate lingered, arms folded, eyes full of poison. Clay's patience thinned. "Tate," he said, voice low enough to frost the room, "step outside." Tate smirked. "Why? Afraid she'll drop another bowl?" Clay's jaw ticked. "Because I need a word." Something in his tone shifted the air. Even Mara felt it. Tate followed Clay toward the hall, boots heavy, attitude heavier. Mara kept her back turned, pretending not to care. But the storm outside wasn't the only one roaring. Through the thin wall, she heard Clay's voice, quiet but edged like a blade. "If you ever speak to her like that again." The rest was drowned out by the wind, leaving Mara frozen mid-stir, breath held, waiting for the thunder that always follows lightning. Clay shut the hallway door behind them, the wind rattling the windows as if the blizzard itself wanted to listen in. Tate leaned against the wall with a bored smirk, arms crossed like he expected to win before the first blow landed. Clay didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You're done pushing her," he said. Tate's smirk twitched. "She volunteered for the challenge, didn't she? Ain't my fault the girl cracks easier than an eggshell." Clay stepped closer, boots grinding against the floorboards, the air tightening like a noose. "You think humiliating her makes you a man?" Tate shrugged. "Makes me honest." Clay's eyes narrowed. "Honest? You want honest?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet, weathered, torn along the edges. "Sheriff Weston sent me this last week." For the first time, Tate's expression shifted. A flicker of something. Fear? Recognition? He hid it under a sneer, but not fast enough. Clay held the paper up. "You know what this is." "I don't need to read your damn paperwork," Tate spit out. Clay unfolded it anyway, slow and deliberate, letting the silence gnaw. "Funny thing about small towns," he said. "They remember. The sheriff? He don't mind reminding folks." Tate lunged to snatch the paper, but Clay's hand landed on his chest, firm and immovable. "Touch her again," Clay said, voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble, "and you'll answer to me." Mara couldn't hear everything from the kitchen, only the tail end of the sentence. The words slid through the thin wooden door like a warm breath on cold skin. Her hand tightened around the wooden spoon she was holding. No one had ever defended her like that, not with fire, not with consequence attached. And that terrified her. Wanting to be protected was one thing. Being the cause of someone else's anger, that was another weight entirely. One she wasn't sure she deserved. She turned away from the door, trying to focus on the dough rising in the bowl. But Clay's voice echoed in her ribs, steady as a heartbeat she wished she didn't need. In the hallway, Tate straightened, throat bobbing. "Boss, you don't want to pick this fight." Clay didn't blink. "You already picked it. I'm just drawing the line." Tate's nostrils flared. "Over a girl who can't bake something without crying?" Clay's jaw ticked. "Over a woman who works harder than you ever will. Over someone who deserves respect. Over the kind of human decency you keep forgetting." Tate's fists clenched. "This ain't over." Clay stepped back, folding the sheriff's paper. "It is for tonight." Tate shoved past him, shoulder colliding with Clay's as he stormed into the bunkhouse. Clay didn't move, didn't flinch. Just let the storm inside him settle before he walked back toward the kitchen. Mara pretended to be busy when he entered, wiping the counter, though it was already clean. Clay didn't expose her, eavesdropping, didn't speak of Tate. He only said gently, "You all right?" She nodded, though her voice wavered. "You didn't have to." "Yeah," he said softly. "I did." She swallowed the lump in her throat. She wanted to ask what Tate had done, what that sheriff's report meant, but fear tugged her back. The weight of other people's sins wasn't hers to carry. Clay tapped his knuckles once on the counter, an unspoken promise, before heading back to handle the restless ranch hands. Mara exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her heart. Outside, the storm finally began to quiet. But another kind of storm, quieter, heavier, settled on the ranch with dawn. Because when the next morning came, the blizzard broke. Christmas Eve rose sharp and clear, and Mara faced the deadline that could make or unmake her. She had to bake the pie. Christmas Eve dawned pale and brittle, the snow outside sparkling like someone had scattered broken glass across the plains. The storm had passed, but inside Mara, another one brewed. Today she had to prove herself, or lose everything she'd worked for. She stood in the kitchen long before sunrise, sleeves rolled up, flour dust drifting through the lantern light. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely measure the sugar. Every sound in the ranch house seemed louder. Bootsteps upstairs, a door slamming, men clearing their throats as they woke, judging, waiting, betting on her to fail. Clay appeared in the doorway, quiet as a shadow. He didn't enter right away. He stayed leaning against the frame, arms crossed, giving her space to breathe. "You sleep at all?" Mara shook her head. Didn't feel like sleeping mattered much. Clay nodded. "I'll sit here. Won't say a word unless you want me to." She didn't answer, but she felt his presence steadier like a post driven deep into the earth. She mixed the dough, breath shallow, heart pounding. The ranch hands began drifting into the bunkhouse, whispering as they passed the open kitchen door. Some snickered, some stared. Some looked almost sympathetic, but sympathy could sting worse than laughter. Mara pressed the dough into the pie tin. Her fingers quivered. Her throat tightened. She was back in her aunt's kitchen at 12 years old, burning the rolls and hearing her cousins whisper, "Of course she messed up. She always does." Memory crept in like frost. Clay saw her shoulders tighten. "You're good," he murmured. "Just keep going." She nodded, though she didn't feel good, didn't feel capable, didn't feel anything except the weight of dozens of eyes waiting for her to crumble. She placed the crust into the oven, lips barely moving, as she whispered a nervous prayer. Minutes crawled. Then smoke, thin at first, then thicker. "No, no, no," Mara gasped, yanking open the oven. The crust smoked, edges charred black. The room spun. Someone in the hallway muttered, "Figures." Her knees nearly buckled. Like so many of us, she believed one mistake defined her worth. And now the mistake stared back at her in burnt edges and darkened crumbs. She turned away from Clay, ashamed. "I can't do this." Clay didn't argue. He didn't lecture. He stepped close enough for her to feel his warmth, but not close enough to overwhelm. "Mara, just breathe. You're stronger than their lies." Her breathing steadied, just enough. She threw out the burnt crust, started again. Sugar, flour, butter, pressure, fear, hope, all folding together. This time her hands shook less. Clay watched the ranch hands gathering near the far wall. Tate was among them, arms crossed, eyes sharp with malice. Clay's stare hardened, warning him without words. When the second crust slid into the oven, Mara closed her eyes and whispered, "Please let this be enough." Clay stayed beside her until he heard his name being called by one of the men outside. "I'll be right back," he told her. "Don't," she started, but caught herself. Okay." He gave her a reassuring nod. "You've got this." And she almost believed him. The moment Clay left the kitchen, the room shifted. Tate stepped inside, slow and deliberate, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one followed. Mara stiffened. "What do you want?" He smirked. "Just checking on the progress." His hand brushed the oven handle, too casually, too quietly. Then, with one smooth twist, he flicked the temperature gauge all the way to maximum. Mara didn't notice. Her back was turned, working on the filling. Tate whispered, "Good luck, sweetheart," and slipped out. The smell hit her first, acrid, bitter, wrong. Mara spun toward the oven just as a puff of smoke curled from its seams. "No, no, no." She flung the door open. Heat blasted her face like a furnace. The crust edges were already darkening far too fast. Her breath seized. This wasn't nerves. This wasn't her mistake. Something was wrong. She grabbed a towel and yanked the pie out. Too hot, too soon. The middle barely set, the edges nearly scorched. Her heart plummeted. Tate. It had to be Tate. Shame and fury tangled inside her, but under them pulsed something steadier. Refusal. For once in her life, she refused to lose. She looked around wildly for an answer, and her gaze stopped on an old cast-iron Dutch oven, sitting on a top shelf, dusty with disuse. Clay had told her once, in a rare soft moment, that his mother used it for pies when the main oven broke during storms. A storm had broken something here, too. Mara dragged a stool over, reached up and hauled the heavy pot down. The lid clanged. The weight shocked her wrists. grounding her. "Okay," she whispered. "All right. Think." She scraped the half-baked pie into a bowl, salvaging what she could of the filling, mixing fresh sugar and butter until it looked less ruined. Her hands shook, but not from fear this time, from sheer stubborn purpose. She pressed a new crust into the Dutch oven, layered the salvaged filling, and placed another crust on top, sealing it like a promise. The ranch hands outside laughed at something, sharp, mocking sounds, but their noise couldn't reach her now. Her world shrank to the beating of her heart and the hiss of the stove. She lifted the Dutch oven, set it carefully onto the stovetop's iron plate, and lowered the lid. Heat radiated through the pot, even, steady. Impossible for Tate to sabotage. This was hers. Minutes passed, 40 of them. Sweat dampened the hair at her temples despite the cold. She knelt, ear close, listening for the soft bubbling that told her the filling was thickening. She lifted the lid once, just briefly. The crust was browning, uneven but alive. Her pulse steadied for the first time all day. "Come on," she whispered, voice trembling. "Come on, please." She lifted the pot again with thick mitts and set it on the counter. Slowly, carefully, she loosened the crust's edges. The pie slid out. Not perfect, not smooth, not what any cookbook would call beautiful. But God, it was hers. Golden in places, darker in others, rustic and flawed and whole. She had made something out of almost nothing, something out of sabotage, something out of herself. Mara rested both hands on the counter, breath shaking. "Let them laugh," she whispered. "I'm not breaking this time." She sprinkled a small handful of sugar on top, letting it melt into a sheen. The pie wasn't delicate or fancy. It looked like resilience, rough around the edges, scarred but standing. Outside, men shifted and murmured. Someone called, "We're waiting, Mara." Clay's voice followed, firm but encouraging. "Whenever you're ready." Mara straightened her apron, wiped flour from her cheeks, and lifted the warm pie. The weight surprised her. Not heavy, but substantial, like it held everything she'd fought through today. She walked toward the bunkhouse door, heart thudding but steady. She had no idea whether they'd cheer or mock, whether Clay would be proud or merely kind, whether Tate would gloat or grit his teeth. All she knew was she wouldn't hide. She stepped into the hallway, pie in hand, breath trembling but sure. She didn't see Tate slip behind the crowd, hiding something small in his palm. Didn't see the smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. And as she pushed the door open to present her pie, she walked straight into the final humiliation Tate had been waiting to spring. The bunkhouse fell quiet when Mara stepped inside, pie held steady against her chest. The air carried that heavy tension, half hunger, half cruelty, like the whole room was daring her to fail one last time. She set the pie on the long table, hands trembling but visible. She didn't hide them. For the first time, she didn't hide anything. Tate pushed through the crowd before she could speak, boots thudding, grin wide and poisonous. "All right, folks," he announced, drawing laughter. "Moment of truth. Let's see what the girl dragged out of the ashes." He reached for the pie with a dramatic sniff. "Smells like desperation." Mara's breath hitched. Clay stepped forward, not hurried, not angry, just steady. "Back up, Tate." Tate blinked. "Why? Afraid I'll tell the truth again?" Clay's jaw tightened. "Because I'll taste it first." A ripple cut through the room. Several men exchanged glances. Tate scoffed. "You defending her again? Now why don't we just call it Clay's Christmas charity pie and be done with it?" Clay ignored him. He picked up the knife, cut a small wedge, and lifted it to his plate. The room leaned in, waiting for a joke or a sneer or some easy punchline. Instead, Clay picked up his fork and took a bite, slow, deliberate, like the world around him wasn't filled with watchful eyes. He chewed, quietly, thoughtfully. Then he took another, and another. Each bite chipped away at the laughter swelling in a few throats. Mara watched him, heart pounding so hard she heard it in her ears. Her whole life seemed to hang on whether the man at the head of this ranch believed she had worth. In her hands, in her work, in herself. Clay set his fork down. His voice carried low but clear. This pie ain't just food, it's courage. A few men shifted awkwardly. Someone coughed. Tate rolled his eyes dramatically. Oh, please. It's a pie, not a sermon. Clay cut another slice. Smaller, sharper. He handed it to Tate. Taste it. Tate barked a laugh. Boss, I ain't eatin'. That wasn't a request. Silence dropped fast. Tate's jaw worked, pride wrestling with fear. Finally, he snatched the slice, shoved it into his mouth, and chewed with exaggerated annoyance. But something in his posture faltered. The crust was crisp but tender, the filling warm and balanced. The pie, imperfect as it looked, carried a depth no one expected. Tate swallowed hard. It's fine. Clay stepped closer. It's better than fine. Say it. Tate's face reddened. It's good, he muttered, barely audible. Clay leaned in. Louder. Tate glared at Mara, then at the room, then finally said with gritted teeth, It's good. A low murmur rippled across the bunkhouse. Not laughter now. Something else. Something shifting. But Clay wasn't finished. You owe her respect. All of you do. Mara's throat tightened painfully. She didn't know whether to cry or flee or stand taller. No one had ever fought for her dignity like that. Not quietly, not gently, not without strings attached. She lifted her chin. It's just a pie, she whispered. Clay shook his head. No, it's more than that. Tate stepped back, humiliated but seething, his gaze darting toward the men who no longer laughed with him. His power had cracked. Mara felt something unfamiliar rising inside her, soft but fierce. Hope. She reached for the pie to serve another slice, fingers steadier than they'd been all day. And then she heard it. Soft at first, a few hands, then more. A sound she hadn't expected in her lifetime. Applause. For a moment after the applause faded, the bunkhouse felt strangely quiet, unfamiliar, almost gentle. Mara stood frozen beside the table, pie knife in hand, chest tight with disbelief. She wasn't dreaming. She wasn't imagining the shift. The ranch hands who once mocked her now looked at her with something she hadn't felt in years. Respect. One by one, they stepped forward. Ramirez scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. Mara, I shouldn't have laughed earlier. That pie. Hell, it's better than my mama's, and she's been cooking since forever. A few chuckles rose, soft and sincere this time. Then Wyatt, usually silent as a fence post, tipped his hat. Ma'am, I'm real sorry for how we treated you. Each apology unknotted something inside her, like someone loosening ropes she'd carried too long. Tate lingered in the doorway, jaw tight, eyes burning. Clay stood beside him, posture unyielding. You're done here, Clay said, voice calm but irrevocable. You don't break people to feel bigger, not on my ranch. Tate didn't argue. Maybe he knew there was no fight left to win. Maybe humiliation had finally reached him. He stomped out into the cold, and the door swung shut behind him with a gust of wind that felt like the last breath of a long, bitter storm. Mara exhaled shakily. Clay stepped forward, nodding toward the pie. You want to serve the rest?" She blinked. "Me? Who else would?" he said with a faint smile. So she did. Slice after slice, she served the men, laughing softly, steady now. Each plate she handed out felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd lost over the years. And with every thank you she received, her spine straightened a little more. When the last slice was gone, Mara stepped outside for air. Snowflakes drifted lightly from a clearing sky, glittering under lantern light. They landed on her hair, her coat, her palms, cool, delicate reminders that winter didn't only take, sometimes it gave. Clay joined her on the porch, boots crunching quietly. He held something wrapped in faded cloth. "Mara," he said, voice gentler than she'd ever heard it, "got something for you." She unwrapped it slowly. A recipe book, leather-worn smooth by time. Pages filled with handwritten notes. Stains of cinnamon, grease, and memory. She recognized it instantly. The one Clay had mentioned. The one his mother carried through. Every winter, every storm, every hungry night. Her breath caught. "Clay, I can't take this." "You can," he said, "and you should. Ma always said a recipe's wasted if it ain't handed to someone with heart." He met her eyes. "That's you." Something warm fluttered through her chest. Not romance, but recognition. Gratitude. Mutual respect forged in hardship. She hugged the book gently to her chest. For once, it really does feel like Christmas. The ranch hands inside had begun singing carols. Off-key, rowdy, but joyful. Their voices rolled out onto the porch like warmth from a fire. Mara looked at Clay, breath steady now. "Thank you for everything." "You earned all this," he said. "Not me." Snow settled around them like soft applause. Narration curled through the moment, tender as a stitched scar. Like many of us who've been broken by cruel voices, she rose. Mara traced her fingers along the recipe book's spine, marveling at how light her shoulders felt, how whole she suddenly seemed. Her journey hadn't been about a pie or a challenge. It had been about finding her voice beneath the weight of silence. Clay pushed his hat back slightly, studying her with quiet pride. "Mara," he said, tone soft but teasing, "next Christmas you're making 2 pies." This was one of many true Western stories. If it stirred your heart, saddle up with us for the next ride.